My name is David Whittaker, and I never thought I'd be the kind of man who carried the weight of both grief and vengeance in the same breath. But when I buried my only son, Andrew, I realized that sometimes the two walk hand in hand. Andrew was only 28 when life ended for him in the cruelest way, an accident so senseless that even now, I still wake up at night expecting a call that it was all some mistake. He was bright, ambitious, the kind of young man who burned with ideas about how the world could be better. He was supposed to outlive me, not the other way around. The funeral should have been about honoring him, remembering the boy who grew into a man determined to leave a mark. Instead, I sat in the front pew and listened to whispers that had nothing to do with grief. My ex-wife, Linda Crawford, and her family weren't mourning. They were calculating. Insurance policies, property values, company shares, millions of dollars spoken about in hushed tones while my son lay in a casket. They thought I was broken. They thought I was powerless. But what they didn't know was that Andrew and I had prepared for this moment. In my pocket that day was a single drafted message. 11 words. And when the time came, those words would change everything. When you lose a child, the world stops making sense. Every noise feels too loud, every silence feels too empty. On the morning of Andrew's funeral, I sat at the edge of my bed for nearly an hour, staring at the suit laid out on the chair. A black suit, a starched white shirt, a tie Andrew had bought me 2 Christmases ago. I remembered him joking, "Dad, one day you'll look like a CEO in this." He never thought I'd be wearing it to bury him. The funeral home was filled with lilies and roses, their sweet scent heavy in the air. Candles flickered at the edges of the chapel, their light soft against the polished wood of the casket that held my boy. The pews filled quickly, friends from UCLA, colleagues from the tech startup he'd poured his soul into, even his old basketball coach from high school. Their faces carried shock and sorrow, like none of them could quite believe Andrew's life had been cut short at 28. I sat in the front row, shoulders hunched, staring at the photograph resting atop the casket. It was Andrew at the beach, hair windswept, eyes bright. That smile had carried me through years of hardship after his mother and I divorced. That smile had been my anchor. And now it was a memory. But not everyone in the room looked broken. To my left sat Linda Crawford, my ex-wife, draped in black silk, a string of pearls at her throat. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, but I'd been married to her once. I knew the difference between real grief and performance. Her tears were for show, timed for when others were watching. When she leaned close to her brothers, the handkerchief lowered, and her voice sharpened. "They said the insurance payout alone is $1.5 million, I overheard her whisper. Her brother nodded, murmuring back, "Plus the condo hat's it worth now, $2 million. 3. My chest tightened. My son hadn't even been laid to rest, and they were already slicing up his life like it was a pie cooling on a windowsill. I gripped the wooden pew until my knuckles went white. The pastor's words blurred into the background as I tried to steady my breathing. He spoke about hope, about Andrew's generosity, about a life cut too short. But all I could hear were the Crawfords, their voices weaving greed into the air like poison. Andrew had been everything to me after his mother passed. I'd raised him through scraped knees and science fairs, through college essays and late-night coding sessions. I was there when he got his first big investment for the startup, and I was there when he called me, laughing, to say, "Dad, I think I've finally built something real." The Crawfords weren't there for any of it. They weren't there when Andrew pulled all-nighters to launch his app. They weren't there when he collapsed in the hospital years earlier, fighting for his life. They weren't there when he whispered to me, "Don't let them take everything I've worked for, Dad." And that's why, months before his death, Andrew and I had sat together at my kitchen table, papers spread out, coffee growing cold, and planned. He'd said, "I don't trust them, Dad. If something happens to me, they'll come for it all. We need a safeguard." So we built one. With the help of his lawyer, Thomas Reynolds, we drafted documents, created accounts, prepared a trust. And we crafted one simple message 11 words long that would trigger the system, lock everything, and move his assets where they belonged. A foundation. His legacy. His shield against vultures. At the time, I prayed I'd never have to use it. But sitting there in the front pew, listening to Linda and her brothers count zeros while Andrew's friends cried, I knew the day was closer than I'd ever imagined. When the service ended, I stood by the casket, accepting handshakes and condolences I barely heard. A young man from Andrew's company hugged me, tears wetting his blazer. He believed in us, Mr. Whitaker, he said. We're going to keep building what he started. I nodded, my throat too tight to answer. As the chapel emptied, I felt a cold presence beside me. Linda. You know, she murmured, her voice low enough that only I could hear, Andrew would have wanted us taken care of. His whole family. I turned to her, eyes burning. Andrew wanted his work taken care of. His dreams. Not your debts. Her smile was thin, practiced. We'll see. She turned and walked away, pearls catching the candlelight. Her brothers followed, whispering again, already planning their next move. I stayed behind a moment longer, hand resting on the polished wood of the casket. I won't let them take you, son, I whispered. Not your name, not your work, not your life. They'll learn what it means when a father keeps his promise. Then I reached into my pocket, felt the cool weight of my phone, and thought about that draft message. 11 words. The trigger Andrew had trusted me to use if the Crawfords tried to steal his legacy. They thought I was broken. They thought I was powerless. But I wasn't. I was a father. And a father fights. The morning after the funeral, I woke up in my quiet house with the same hollow ache gnawing at my chest. My coffee turned cold on the table as I stared at the stack of envelopes left from the service condolence cards, flowers ordered online, polite words from people who didn't know what else to say. None of them filled the silence Andrew left behind. By noon, the phone rang. It was Andrew's lawyer, Thomas Reynolds. His voice was measured, professional, but I caught the undertone of unease. David, the Crawfords requested an expedited meeting about Andrew's will. They want it read tomorrow afternoon. Can you be there? Of course I could. I'd walk through fire if it meant protecting Andrew's memory. The following day, I walked into Reynolds and Associates, a downtown office tower with glass walls that reflected the gray winter sky. I took the elevator up to the 22nd floor, heart pounding with each passing number. Inside the conference room, Linda was already seated at the polished mahogany table, flanked by her two brothers, Charles and Martin Crawford. Their designer suits and cufflinks gleamed under the fluorescent lights. They looked less like grieving relatives and more like businessmen closing in on a deal. David, Linda said, her smile polite but cold. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wouldn't miss it, I replied flatly, taking a seat across from her. Thomas entered moments later, carrying a thick file. He laid it on the table with deliberate care. Thank you all for coming. As you know, Andrew left behind assets, accounts, and certain instructions. My duty today is to read his will in full. Linda leaned forward, her pearls glinting. Yes, let's get to it. Thomas adjusted his glasses and began to read. Andrew had indeed left substantial assets, company shares, life insurance, real estate, and investments totaling several $1 million. My chest tightened as I listened. Andrew had built so much in so little time. And now his legacy sat on this table, vulnerable to the vultures waiting to claim it. When Thomas finished, Linda clasped her hands together as though in prayer. So, we'll proceed with dividing these assets accordingly. Andrew would have wanted the family secure. Family? I asked, my voice edged with steel. You mean your family, Linda? Her eyes flicked to me, sharp as glass. Don't be difficult, David. This isn't about you. You had your years with him. He lived with me after college, he trusted me with his future. I bit back the urge to laugh. Andrew had trusted me with his fears, his struggles, his dreams. Not her. Thomas cleared his throat, cutting through the tension. There's one more matter. Andrew left a sealed addendum. He instructed me to deliver it only under specific circumstances. Linda stiffened. What kind of circumstances? Thomas slid an envelope across the table, but instead of opening it, he tapped the folder. Andrew also left digital instructions. A security protocol. Until certain conditions are met, none of these funds can be transferred. Charles leaned forward, his voice low and irritated. What kind of conditions? Thomas's lips tightened. I can't disclose that. What I can say is that the assets are protected by a failsafe Andrew put in place with his father's cooperation. The Crawfords' faces drained of color. Linda's painted nails drummed against the table. He wouldn't have done that without being pressured. I met her gaze. No, Linda. He did it because he knew exactly what you'd try to do. The room fell silent for a beat, the weight of Andrew's foresight settling over us like heavy smoke. Finally, Martin scoffed. We'll see about this. Money moves faster than paperwork. There are always ways around obstacles. And there it was. Their plan wasn't grief, or even closure. It was acquisition. They wanted Andrew's wealth parceled, liquidated, tucked neatly into their accounts. To them, his death was a business opportunity. When the meeting ended, they stormed out, whispering furiously to each other in the hallway. I lingered behind. Thomas gave me a steady look. David, you know what Andrew left in place. Are you ready for what comes next? I nodded slowly. I've been ready since the day we sat at my kitchen table. I just hoped I wouldn't have to use it. Thomas hesitated. The Crawfords won't back down quietly. They'll push. They'll scheme. They'll try to force your hand. Then let them, I said. Andrew's shield is already in place. And when the time comes, I'll send the message. Leaving the office, I felt the cold winter air bite against my face, sharper than ever. I walked down the crowded street, people rushing past with holiday shopping bags, laughter, and chatter. To them, it was just another December afternoon. To me, it was war. The Crawfords thought Andrew's death meant a payday. They thought grief would make me weak. They thought wrong. Because Andrew had trusted me with his last line of defense. And when the Crawfords came for his millions, they would discover what true consequences looked like. I slipped my phone from my pocket and reread the draft message sitting there, waiting. 11 words. A nuclear option in the palm of my hand. I whispered into the wind, not yet, son. But soon. The week following the will reading was a blur of whispered rumors and veiled threats. The Crawfords moved like sharks in bloodied water, circling assets they hadn't earned, circling a fortune that wasn't theirs. Every time my phone rang, part of me braced for another scheme. It didn't take long. On Thursday evening, I stopped by the small diner near my house, a place where Andrew and I used to eat late-night pancakes when he was in high school. The neon sign flickered as I slid into a booth. The waitress, an older woman named Marlene, set down a steaming mug of coffee. I barely had time to stir in cream before a familiar voice cut through the clatter of dishes. David. I looked up. Linda stood across from me, still in her silk coat, pearl earrings glinting beneath the fluorescent lights. She looked painfully out of place in a greasy spoon, but her expression was sharp, deliberate. She slid into the booth opposite me without asking. We need to talk, she said. I leaned back, arms crossed. About Andrew? Or about his money? Her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Don't be crass. About both. She folded her hands on the table like she was conducting a business negotiation instead of speaking about our dead son. The insurance payout, the company shares, the conduit should all come to me and my side of the family. You've got your pension, your house. Isn't that enough? I nearly laughed. Enough? Linda, no amount of money is enough for you. It never has been. Her smile faltered, replaced by ice. You always saw me as greedy. Maybe I am. But Andrew knew how the world worked. He knew appearances mattered. He wouldn't have wanted his father, a man who fixes boilers and paints fences, controlling millions of dollars. My jaw tightened. What Andrew wanted was for his work to survive. That's why he set up protections. That's why he trusted me, not you. Linda's eyes narrowed. Protections? What protections? I didn't answer. Let her wonder. Let her stew. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. If you get in my way, David, I'll bury you. Don't think for a second that I won't. The Crawfords have influence, connections you can't even imagine. Judges, bankers, investors, they all owe us favors. I sipped my coffee, calm on the outside though my stomach churned with anger. Then I guess we'll see how much those favors are worth when the truth comes out. She stared at me for a long moment, then stood abruptly. You'll regret this, she hissed before sweeping out of the diner, heels clicking like gunshots against the tile floor. The following day, I received a call from Andrew's close friend, Michael Hayes, who had been a co-founder in the startup. His voice trembled with frustration. Mr. Whitaker, have you heard what the Crawfords are saying? They've been calling investors, telling them Andrew left no clear succession plan, that the family will be handling operations from now on. I felt heat rush to my face. Handling operations? They wouldn't know a line of code from a toaster oven. Michael's sigh crackled over the line. Exactly. They want to force a buyout, liquidate everything for quick cash. If they succeed, the company dies. I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. Andrew didn't pour his life into that company just so his uncles could strip it bare. Michael hesitated, then added, there's more. One of the investors told me Linda implied you were unstable. That you might not be in the right state of mind to manage Andrew's estate. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles ached. That was their play, paint me as a grieving, irrational father while they positioned themselves as the responsible ones. But they underestimated me. Michael, I said firmly, don't worry. Andrew and I planned for this. Just hold your ground for now. When I hung up, I pulled out my phone again. The draft message glowed on the screen, those 11 words steady as stone. Andrew and I had crafted them carefully. If sent, the message would notify Reynolds, trigger a digital failsafe, and freeze every asset the Crawfords were drooling over. The insurance, the shares, the property all locked tight, rerouted into a trust for Andrew's foundation. But once I pressed send, there would be no undoing it. I wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, I opened the photo gallery and scrolled through pictures of Andrew. Him at age 12 holding a science fair ribbon, him at graduation with his cap tilted sideways, him at the beach last summer laughing with a surfboard tucked under his arm. Every photo reminded me why this fight mattered. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. Linda's threats replayed in my head. Michael's warning about the buyout echoed in my ears. Finally, I whispered into the silence, Andrew, I'll wait for the right moment. But when I strike, it will end them. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone like a weapon, and let the weight of what was coming settle into my bones. The Crawfords thought they were circling an easy target. They thought I was just an old man too tired to fight. But I had something they'd never understand, Andrew's trust. And that trust was about to become their downfall. They didn't bother pretending anymore. The Crawfords shifted from coy questions and passive-aggressive sympathy to full-on assault. If part 2 and 3 were the probing swipes of sharks, then part 4 was the circling, louder, bolder, and getting closer with every hour. It started small and ugly. The calls increased, blocked numbers, withheld caller IDs, messages left at all hours. "David, partner with us," one voice crooned. "Help us make the right business decisions for Andrew's legacy." Another left a clipped voicemail, the sort that wants to sound reasonable but is sugar-coated coercion. "We're only looking out for the family. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Then the letters arrived. Thick manila envelopes stuffed with evaluation reports and independent assessments, each one promising a quick solution if I just set up a meeting. Legal teams started to pop up in my mailbox like weeds, small firms sending glossy brochures about probate strategy, bigger firms asking if I needed representation against potential familial claims. The smell of money and opportunism was everywhere. Thomas kept me grounded. He met me at my kitchen table more than once that week, paper cups of coffee growing cold between us as we worked through contingencies. "They'll try everything," he said, tapping a pen against his pad. "Publicity, character assassination, claim and drag through probate, anything to make the cost of protecting the trust unbearable." "Do they have any legal leg to stand on?" I asked. "Not really," Thomas said. "Beneficiary designations and properly executed trust documents are hard to overcome. But law isn't just black and white, it's human time, money, patience. They want to exhaust you." That was the word that kept echoing, exhaust. Not just my finances, my spirit. They seemed to think they could starve me emotionally until I agreed to whatever they wanted. I thought of Andrew's line, "and let them take this from me," and felt an anger that was a cold, steady thing in my gut. So I started keeping a log. Every call, every envelope, every conversation got recorded, dates, times, what was said. I learned to answer in calm, clipped statements that didn't give them emotional leverage. When Linda called and tried the mother's pain routine, I listened to her perform, then replied, "All communications about the estate go through Thomas." She didn't like that. One afternoon I went by the condo Andrews placed, the one that would become part of the trust. I wanted to see it, to feel it, to be in his rooms where his life had happened. I parked 2 buildings away and walked up, letting the memory of his laugh pull me through the lobby. But there was Linda on the step again, flanked by Charles and Martin. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread, silk coat, perfect hair, but the look in her eyes was raw. She smiled, and it did some strange thing to my chest. It was practiced to such a degree that it had become cruel. "David," she said, stepping forward. "We were just admiring the place. I can't believe he left such a beautiful home. It should be used, not locked away." "It will be used for the foundation," I said. "For scholarships, mentorship programs." Andrew wanted utility, not ornament. "Utility?" Martin scoffed. "That's just a fancy word for giving it away." "You mean charity," I corrected quietly. "And sometimes charity is the right thing." The brothers exchanged a look. "You think you can keep us out?" Charles asked. "You think you can just push us aside with paperwork?" I felt the old defensive spark, maybe survival, maybe shame flare. "Andrew wasn't a pie to be cut," I said. "He wasn't a ledger entry. He was a person who wanted his work to mean something." Their faces hardened. Linda stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're not a young man, David. This will wear you down. Think of your health. Think of your peace. Is this battle worth it?" The word peace was a thin blade. There was a truth to it. I was tired, bone deep tired, the kind you don't notice until it's pointed out. But peace at the cost of letting vultures feast on a child's legacy was no peace I could accept. I left the condo and walked along the street, the city noise washing over me. I called Thomas from a payphone near the corner and left a terse message. They were at the condo. "They're pushing hard. Advise." His reply came within the hour. "Hold. Don't escalate. We want clear grounds and witnesses." Let them flail. They'll make mistakes. So I started to plan like a man in a small, quiet war. If they wanted spectacle, I'd give them an arena where the truth could be undeniable. If they wanted witnesses, I'd invite witnesses. If they wanted to make an example of me, I'd make sure the example was not the one they thought. The activists among Andrew's friends rallied in small, stubborn ways. Michael and a few co-founders sent a letter to the investor group detailing Andrew's management style and strategic vision, proof that the company's future under a predatory buyout would be ruined. Professor Singh offered to testify about Andrew's character and his expressed wishes for the foundation. Susan Bennett at the bank confirmed contingency protocols and agreed to expedite everything the moment the trigger went out. And amid all this preparation, Linda kept whispering about reconciliation, booking a hotel banquet and inviting the family to talk things through, the kind of trap that let her stand in front of a room and play the aggrieved mother while allies in the back row nodded along. When she sent that invitation, something in my chest went electric. The banquet would give them a stage, yes, but it would also give me an audience. If I was going to end this, it would be where they were most exposed, public and theatrical, where the Crawfords could not hide. I imagined the rows of guests, the microphones, the polite applause, the choice words that would hang in the air. I'd waited for a reason to press send that wouldn't feel like vengeance. I wanted the world to see what their hunger looked like live, in a room full of witnesses. The decision didn't feel righteous, it felt necessary. That night I typed a note to Andrew in my phone, fingers clumsy, "Son, if this is the way to honor you, I'll do it. I won't let them turn your life into a ledger." I left the message unsent, thumb resting on the screen, feeling the gravity of what would happen when I finally moved. It was no longer about being tired. It was about being faithful to a promise, to a life, to a truth that couldn't be bought. The banquet was scheduled for next week. The stage was set. And I, for the first time since the funeral, felt ready. The banquet hall smelled like lemon polish and cheap perfume. Round tables glowed under chandeliers that tried to make everything look elegant, the effect was hollow. I arrived early and sat at the back, where the shadows hid me. From there I could watch without being watched, like a sentinel waiting for the moment the intruders would finally show their teeth. They arrived like a small army. Linda in black silk, pearls in just the right place to catch the light and the eyes of anyone who doubted her grief. Charles and Martin in suits that had probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. Cousins, family friends, a few investors Linda had managed to rope into the theater of it all, faces I recognized from weddings and charity galas, people whose condolences last week had been as rehearsed as this event. The room filled with polite murmurs and the soft clink of cutlery. Someone asked for quiet, and Linda took the stage with the practiced poise of a woman who had spent her life performing for an audience. She opened with ritual lines: "Thanks for coming," a tribute to Andrew's spirit, a call for unity. The applause sounded automatic, as if the hotel staff had been instructed to clap on cue. I kept my phone in my pocket, the draft message alive and unread. 11 words, precise, surgical and irreversible. Thomas sat 2 tables away, his expression unreadable. Professor Singh was near the front, notebook in hand. Susan Bennett had slipped in quietly and was watching the room with the attention of someone who knew how to make systems move. Linda's voice softened. "We all miss him terribly," she said, eyes glassy. "Andrew wanted family to be looked after. He wouldn't want us fighting." An eager cousin called out from the second row, "And how do you propose we honor that, Linda?" A screen dropped down behind her, and Mark, always Mark, the loud one, stood and clicked a remote. Charts appeared, pie graphs, projected distributions, color-coded suggestions. The slide read, "A practical proposal for family stewardship. 40% Crawford family, 40% Whitaker family, 20% charitable allocation." The numbers looked tidy in Times New Roman, they were a spreadsheet masquerading as compassion. My hands went cold. The room smelled faintly of overcooked chicken and ambition. When Mark finished, the hall hummed with nods and murmurs. People admired a neatly framed plan. It made sense to people who did not understand Andrew's work, to those who measured his life in liquid assets rather than in mentorship hours and late-night fixes. Linda turned to the room and lowered her voice. All we ask is fairness. David, I know this is painful, but you must recognize the truth: we are family too. I stood. Silence followed me like a shadow. The sound of the chandeliers seemed to pause. For a moment all I could hear was my own pulse. Then the world narrowed to Linda's face, the practiced sadness, the sharpened jaw. Family, I said, my voice steady but low. Family is not a spreadsheet. A ripple of polite discomfort moved through the crowd. Linda's smile flickered. You weren't here when he counted out his change to buy bus fare, I continued. You weren't there when he coded his nights away on little to no sleep. You weren't in the hospital when it was just him and me listening to machines. Don't rewrite his life because you like the ending. Someone muttered. A man 2 tables over shifted in his chair. Mark's hand tightened around his glass. For a second I saw something like shame cross Linda's face, and then it hardened into defiance. You're being melodramatic, David. Her voice cut like glass. You'll ruin everything if you keep this up. That was the cue. She thought she could bully me into compromise in public, flip sympathy and social pressure into leverage. What she didn't know was that every move she made had been anticipated. While she had been rehearsing her lines and balancing the optics, Andrew and I had spent months tying legal knots that only a single signal could undo. I felt Thomas's gaze on me. He had rehearsed the mechanics with me until they were second nature. The message, once sent, would trigger a sequence. Insurance frozen. Condo conveyed to trust. Shares redirected. No court could claw back assets that were already secured in a functioning foundation account. The systems were designed to act automatically, no human clerk between the command and the transfer. One keystroke. One small whoosh. Done. My thumb hovered for a breath. In that half-second the room was a lifetime. Faces mid-expression, the clank of silverware paused, a chandelier lens catching light like an eye. I pressed send. The sensation was anticlimactic, a slight vibration, a soft sound. To me, it rang like a starting pistol. Almost immediately, my phone buzzed. Susan. Her text read, directive received. Transfers secured. Trust activated. Notifications sent to relevant custodians. She had the calm, efficient tone of someone who had moved mountains in a data center and slept soundly afterward. I turned the screen and let the words show against the glow. For the room it was a small rectangle of light and a sentence. For the Crawfords it was a hurricane. At first there was disbelief. Mark laughed as if this were a joke. Then a look passed over his face, something like recognition of the loss of a bet. Linda's color drained. Her hands went to her pearls as if to steady herself. Around the room, conversations dissolved into rising panic. A cousin made a frantic call, the investor in the third row frantically thumbed a number, the caterer looked suddenly earnest about clearing plates. Voices collided, accusations flying, demands for explanations, for lawyers, for proof. You can't do that. Mark shouted. This isn't legal. Thomas stood and walked to the podium. Everything executed as per Mr. Whitaker's and Mr. Andrew Whitaker's directives, he said clearly. Documents are on file. The transfers are complete. The assets are in the trust and designated to the Andrew Whitaker Scholars Fund. A man near the front, one of the investors, swore and stormed out. Others followed, eyes darting, reputations collapsing in real time. Linda remained frozen, lips moving as if forming words she couldn't speak. I felt the room tilt under the weight of what had just happened. Some people wept quietly, perhaps out of regret, perhaps out of disbelief. Others pivoted into damage control mode, whispering about appeals and legal options. The truth was, these moves were designed not to be reversible in the way the Crawfords had hoped. Someone shouted, "You monster, the sort of thing people say when they realize their buffet has been cleared by a hand they didn't see. I answered nothing. There was no victory in gloating. This was not about punishment. It was about honoring a son's last decisions, about stopping a theft in the name of family. Linda fled the stage, her mask finally shredded. Outside, the night air bit at her cheeks the way the truth had. I slipped out a side door and stood on the sidewalk, the cool breeze like an exhale. My phone buzzed again, messages of support, surprise, hatred, praise. Professor Singh was already texting, "Well done. He'd be proud. Susan, will handle inquiries. No gaps. Thomas, prepare for noise PR and legal. You did the right thing." I looked back through the glass at the hall. Tables scattered, centerpieces askew, remnants of a spectacle turned into a small war zone of emotion and accusation. The Crawfords had come to claim a meal, they left with empty plates and bruised pride. Walking to my car, I felt raw and hollow and oddly light all at once. The act of sending had not erased my grief. Nothing could. But it had stopped the immediate theft of a life's work, and in that small, terrible way it felt like a first step toward justice. I drove home slowly, headlights cutting ribbons through the drizzle. Andrew's voice threaded through my memory, "Build something that makes someone else's life easier." Tonight, I had done the first honest thing to make that happen. The morning after the banquet, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, lawyers, bankers, everyone wanted a statement. Headlines were already circulating online: grieving father halts multi-million transfer with one text. Some called me ruthless, others called me courageous. The Crawfords, though, called me something else entirely: enemy. By noon, Thomas was in my kitchen, jacket slung over the back of a chair, coffee in hand. He looked tired but alert, the way a soldier looks before a campaign. "They've already filed motions," he said. "Linda's petitioning for emergency probate intervention. She claims you acted irrationally, that the trust activation was coercive." I exhaled slowly. "She'll twist anything to make herself the victim." Thomas nodded. "It won't stick legally, but we can't underestimate optics. She'll lean on her connections, play the grieving mother. We'll need to be ready." Ready. I've been ready since the day Andrew asked me to promise I'd protect his work. The first court hearing came quickly. Downtown, the courthouse steps buzzed with cameras and microphones. The Crawfords swept in like royalty, Linda draped in black again, pearls shining under a cloudy sky. She paused dramatically at the steps, handkerchief dabbing her eyes for the cameras. Charles and Martin flanked her, stone-faced, murmuring about justice for Andrew. I walked past them with Thomas, head down, coat collar turned up against the wind. No cameras, no dramatics. Just a father keeping a promise. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. Reporters filled the benches, pens scratching, cameras clicking despite the bailiff's warnings. Linda's lawyer, a sleek man with perfect hair, rose first. "Your Honor, this is a case of manipulation," he declared. "My client, Andrew's mother, has been excluded from her rightful inheritance. Mr. Whitaker," he gestured at me like I was a villain, "took advantage of a grieving young man, convincing him to sign over everything to a trust that he alone controls." I clenched my jaw. Every word was poison, but I stayed still. Thomas rose calmly, adjusting his tie. "With respect, Your Honor, this narrative ignores the facts. Andrew Whitaker was an accomplished adult, a business founder, a man with clear intentions. He documented those intentions meticulously with this very court and with legal counsel. The trust is his design, not his father's." He laid out documents: Andrew's signature, recorded statements, even video testimony Andrew had insisted on months before his death. "My son, alive on screen, speaking firmly, if anything happens to me, I want my assets protected. I don't trust certain family members to respect my wishes. I trust my father." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Linda's face froze, her hand tightening on her pearls. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowed. This appears deliberate. Not coerced. Linda's lawyer sputtered, but... No, the judge said firmly. You'll need stronger evidence than character attacks. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed. Questions flew like arrows. Mr. Whitaker, do you regret blocking your ex-wife's family? Was this about money or revenge? Do you feel guilty? I stopped, met their gaze, and spoke quietly into the sea of microphones. This was never about money. My son built a legacy, and I'm here to make sure it isn't dismantled for greed. That's all. Then I walked away, leaving the Crawfords to perform for the cameras. But battles aren't won in a single hearing. Over the following weeks, motions stacked up like sandbags in a storm. Linda's team filed for injunctions, tried to freeze accounts, even questioned my mental fitness. They dragged my medical records into the conversation, waving around notes about stress and fatigue as though exhaustion equaled incompetence. One afternoon in court, Martin sneered across the aisle. You're old, David. You won't last long enough to manage all this. Why not hand it over now? I stared at him, calm. Because Andrew didn't trust you. That's why. The judge silenced him, but his words rang in my ears all the same. Through it all, allies emerged. Andrew's colleagues packed the courtroom in quiet solidarity. Michael testified, his voice shaking, about Andrew's plans for the foundation and how often he'd said, I want to build something that lasts beyond me. Professor Singh explained Andrew's mentorship vision, turning abstract dreams into tangible purpose. And Susan Bennett, steady as ever, brought records. Spreadsheets, signed transfers, airtight evidence. Everything triggered exactly as directed, she said. There was no fraud, no coercion, only execution of Andrew's lawful instructions. Each testimony stacked another brick into the wall shielding Andrew's legacy. By the third hearing, the Crawfords' confidence began to crack. Linda's tears looked forced, her speeches recycled. Reporters started writing less about her tragic loss and more about her aggressive pursuit of assets. Even investors distanced themselves, wary of the spectacle. I watched the shift like a tide turning. It wasn't triumph, I felt it was relief. Relief that Andrew's careful planning was holding, that his voice was louder than their greed even from beyond the grave. The final blow came when the judge issued a ruling. The court recognizes the validity of the Andrew Whitaker Trust. All assets are to remain within its protection. Petition to dissolve the trust is denied. Linda gasped audibly. Charles cursed under his breath. Reporters scribbled furiously. I closed my eyes, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It wasn't joy, not exactly. It was vindication, a promise kept. As we left the courthouse, Thomas patted my shoulder. You did it, David. Andrew's safe. But I shook my head. We did it. Andrew did it. I was just the hand pressing send. Outside, the Crawfords huddled together, whispering frantically to reporters who no longer cared. Their empire of entitlement had crumbled, exposed for what it was. And May walked down those courthouse steps not as a man who had won, but as a father who had finally, fully honored his son's last request. The war wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about dignity. About memory. About ensuring that Andrew's life was more than numbers on a ledger. And as I looked up at the winter sky, pale and vast above the courthouse dome, I whispered, it's yours now, son. All of it. Untouched. The Crawfords thought the courtroom would be their stage. What they never understood was that the real trial would happen outside, in the court of public opinion. Within days of the judge's ruling, the story spread beyond Los Angeles. Local outlets picked it up first. Father protects late son's millions from greedy relatives. Then national papers. Cable news. Talk radio. Blogs. Even podcasts dedicated entire episodes to dissecting the drama. My phone buzzed constantly: friends, strangers, reporters. Some wanted interviews, others wanted to thank me, and a few simply wanted gossip. At first, I kept quiet. Silence was my shield. But then a journalist named Caroline Perez showed up at my door with a notebook and recorder. She wasn't pushy, not like the rest. She spoke softly, like someone who had known loss. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, "I don't want a scandal. I want the truth. Tell me why you pressed send." Something about her tone disarmed me. I invited her in, poured coffee, and for an hour I told her about Andrew, the late nights, the hospital scare, the plans at my kitchen table. I explained the trust, the fail-safe, and most importantly, the why, that Andrew wanted his work, not his wealth, to outlive him. Caroline's article ran 2 days later. The headline was simple: "A Father's Promise, How One Text Preserved a Son's Legacy." She wrote with compassion, weaving Andrew's dreams with my grief. She painted Linda and her brothers not as caricatures of greed but as people who had lost their way. The effect was devastating. Sympathy shifted almost overnight. The Crawfords scrambled. Linda went on morning television, dabbing her eyes with tissues as she told a sympathetic host, "I only wanted what was fair. I lost my son too." But the comments under the video told a different story. Fair. She wanted his money. This woman disgusts me. Using grief for cash. All respect to Mr. Whitaker. That's a real parent. Charles and Martin tried their own strategy, writing an op-ed in a business journal, arguing that wealth should remain in the bloodline. It backfired spectacularly. Readers mocked their entitled tone. One reply went viral: "If greed is genetic, then maybe the Crawfords are proof." Their polished image cracked. At charity galas, people whispered instead of clapped. Business partners quietly cut ties. Even their country club membership became the subject of review. Meanwhile, the foundation Andrew and I had envisioned suddenly had oxygen. Donations poured in, many small but heartfelt. College students sent $20 checks with notes, "I want to be part of this." Alumni from Andrew's high school pledged to volunteer. Michael and the other co-founders of his startup offered to run mentorship programs for free. I sat at my dining table night after night, opening envelopes with shaky hands, reading words that made my throat tighten. "I lost my dad young too. Thank you for honoring your son. Your story gave me courage to cut ties with people who only wanted money." Andrew's dream lives on. For the first time since his death, I felt something besides anger. I felt purpose. But public reckoning is not gentle. It tears open everything. One afternoon, as I left the grocery store, a woman stopped me in the parking lot. She was older, hair streaked with silver, eyes fierce. "You did the right thing," she said firmly. "Too many families let greed win. You showed them." I nodded, grateful, but she wasn't finished. "Don't let guilt eat you alive, Mr. Whitaker. You didn't just save money, you saved your son's name." Her words followed me home. Guilt. Yes, that was the shadow clinging to me. I had honored Andrew's wishes, but had I also severed the last thread between him and his mother? Could Linda ever have found her way back if I hadn't cut her off so sharply? That night, I sat with Andrew's photo and whispered, "Did I go too far, son?" The silence answered me. The Crawfords weren't silent, though. They filed appeals, launched smear campaigns online, even hired a PR firm to paint themselves as victims. But every effort only deepened the divide. The public didn't buy it. Too much evidence contradicted their claims, too much of Andrew's own voice was preserved. One viral clip from the courtroom the moment Andrew's recorded testimony played circulated endlessly on social media. His words, "I trust my father," became a rallying cry. Hashtags trended, "Trust your father, legacy over greed," Andrew Whitaker lives on. And suddenly, it wasn't just my fight anymore. It was a symbol. Caroline Perez returned a month later, notebook in hand again. "Do you realize what's happening?" she asked. I shook my head. "Your story isn't just about one family. It's about all families. People see themselves in this: parents protecting children, children planning legacies. You've become a mirror." I laughed bitterly. "A mirror covered in cracks." She smiled gently. "Cracks let the light through." Still, the personal cost was real. The Crawfords stopped pretending at civility. They left threatening voicemails, hinted at digging up dirt from my past, even showed up outside my house one evening, headlights parked across the street. I sat inside with the lights off, hand clenched around my phone, debating whether to call the police. But then the cars left, their intimidation as hollow as their claims. They were losing power, and they knew it. What struck me most wasn't their threats, it was their desperation. They had built their identities on entitlement, and watching that collapse was like watching addicts denied a fix. Their hunger consumed them, and the world was finally seeing it. The reckoning culminated in a televised panel discussion, legal analysts, ethicists, even a pastor. The host posed the question, should family always come before legal documents? Or are clear boundaries necessary? One panelist said, "This isn't about money. It's about respect." The father honored his son's autonomy. The Crawfords tried to erase it. Another added, "It's a parable of modern life when love is conditional, and greed wears a mask of family." I watched from my living room, the screen flickering, my heart strangely calm. My name, my son's name, were on national television, but for once it wasn't scandal. It was lesson. By spring, the Crawfords had faded into the background. Their appeals denied, their social circles shrunken, their reputation stained. They were whispers now, not shouts. And May wasn't free of grief, but I was free of their shadow. The world had judged, and for once, justice hadn't been bought. But the public reckoning was only part of the journey. The true measure would be in what came next, whether Andrew's foundation could live, breathe, and change lives the way he dreamed. Spring sunlight slanted through my blinds, warm and steady. For the first time since Andrew's death, I woke not to dread but to a kind of quiet expectancy. The courtroom battles, the public reckoning, the Crawfords' endless noise, all of it had settled into a background hum. What remained now was the work Andrew and I had envisioned together, turning his fortune into something that mattered. The Andrew Whitaker Scholars Fund officially launched in March. We rented a modest community hall for the announcement: no chandeliers, no staged grief, no theatrics. Just folding chairs, a podium, and rows of young people who looked as nervous as they did hopeful. Michael Hayes stood beside me, straightening his tie like he was about to pitch to investors again. But this wasn't about profits. This was about futures. "Today," I said into the microphone, my voice trembling but clear, "we're not talking about inheritance. We're talking about legacy." Andrew believed opportunity should never be locked behind a bank account. He wanted young people, students, dreamers, inventors to have the tools to build. That's what this fund is for. Applause filled the hall, loud and genuine. I saw in the crowd faces from every walk of life: high school seniors, single mothers returning to college, young veterans learning new trades. Some clutched envelopes with application essays inside, others just came to listen. For them, Andrew wasn't just a man who died too soon. He was a possibility. The first scholarships went to 5 students. Carla, a quiet girl from East LA, wanted to study biomedical engineering. She told me her mother worked 2 jobs cleaning houses and saving every dollar, but it was never enough. "Your son's story," she said, "reminded me not to give up on mine." Marcus, a veteran who had lost his leg in service, wanted to start a program teaching coding to other wounded soldiers. His application essay began, "Pain doesn't end you. It just reroutes you." Lila, a foster child who had lived in 12 homes before 18, dreamed of becoming a lawyer for kids like her. She whispered through tears when she accepted, "No one's ever believed in me before." Javier, a first-generation college student, wanted to study renewable energy. "Andrew's app," he said, "showed me that tech can actually solve problems." And Emma, a shy poet with a stutter, simply wanted a year without choosing between rent and tuition. Her thank you letter ended with, "Sometimes the gift isn't just money. Sometimes it's permission to hope." Each name carved itself into my heart. Each handshake felt like a thread in a tapestry Andrew had begun weaving long before. The Crawfords, of course, hated it. They muttered in the press that I was squandering wealth. They hinted darkly that I'd brainwashed Andrew. But the world wasn't listening to them anymore. Their stage had collapsed. My son's voice, preserved in documents, videos, and in the lives now unfolding because of him, drowned theirs out completely. One night, unable to sleep, I sat at my desk surrounded by application essays. I opened Andrew's old laptop, the one I hadn't touched since he passed. The desktop was cluttered with files, code, notes. In the middle sat a folder named simply Future. Inside, dozens of documents, plans for the company, outlines for the foundation, even a list titled Scholarship Criteria. My throat closed as I read lines in his handwriting: priority for resilience. People who fought harder than most. People who know what it costs to dream. He had already built the blueprint. All I had done was light the fuse. The following months brought transformation I couldn't have predicted. Donations doubled. Volunteers signed up faster than we could organize them. A local university offered to partner with the fund, matching scholarships dollar for dollar. National media began calling the foundation a model for family-led philanthropy. But what mattered most weren't the headlines. It was the letters. One came from Carla's mother, written in shaky handwriting: "I used to pray every night for a miracle. I didn't think it would come through strangers. Thank you for believing in my daughter." Another from Marcus, who sent a photo of himself teaching a room full of fellow veterans, laptops open, determination in their eyes. The caption read, "This is what healing looks like." I pinned those letters to my wall. On bad days, when the house felt too quiet, I read them out loud like prayers. And slowly, the grief shifted. It didn't disappear, I don't think it ever will, but it grew less sharp, less blinding. It softened into something I could carry. Some nights I still dreamed of Andrew, still reached for the phone to call him before remembering he was gone. But now those moments ended not in despair, but in a kind of bittersweet gratitude. One evening, I walked along the beach where Andrew used to surf. The waves crashed steady, relentless. I whispered into the wind, "Your work lives, son. You live." For a long time, I stood there, the ocean spray on my face, imagining him beside me. Linda never came to the scholarship events. Charles and Martin retreated into whatever corners of business would still have them. I heard rumors: failed investments, doors closed, invitations rescinded. Their hunger had consumed them, leaving nothing but ash. I felt no triumph in that. Only pity. They had tried to take Andrew's legacy and ended up losing their own. One afternoon, months later, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name scrawled in rushed ink. Inside was a single page. "David. I know you hate me, and maybe I deserve it. But I want you to know I do think of him. Not the money, not the headlines. Just him. Sometimes at night I remember him as a boy. I wonder what he'd think of me now. Linda." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. I didn't reply. Forgiveness is slow, and maybe it isn't always possible. But at least she had remembered him as her son, not as a bank account. That was something. By the one-year anniversary of Andrew's death, the fund had awarded 20 scholarships. We held a small memorial at the same community hall. This time, the air was lighter, the room filled not with whispers of greed but with stories of hope. Each student spoke for a few minutes, sharing progress, setbacks, dreams. Lila, the foster child turned law student, summed it up best. Andrew may be gone, but because of him, none of us feel forgotten. The applause that followed shook the walls. I sat there, tears on my cheeks, hands trembling, and for the first time since I lowered Andrew into the ground, I felt peace. When the evening ended, I lingered in the empty hall, chairs stacked, lights dimmed. I placed my hand on the podium where I had spoken months before and whispered, "We did it, son. We kept the promise." And in that quiet, I felt him not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a presence woven into every life the foundation would touch. Andrew's millions had not gone to greed. They had become seeds. Seeds scattered across young lives, taking root in ways I would never fully see. That, I realized, was the true inheritance. Not money. Not property. But the chance for others to dream. And as I locked the doors and stepped into the cool night, I carried with me the unshakable truth: sometimes one message, just 11 words, can outlive death itself.